I'm Jenna Seery, a bookseller and associate producer of Poured Over. And today I am so excited to be joined by Elizabeth George, who is the author of so many books for adults, for young people, and of course, the author of the Lynley series, which has been so successful, so beloved by so many people. And today we are here to talk about the newest in that series, which is A Slowly Dying Cause. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Great. It's a great pleasure. Thank you.
So we are on book 22 of the
That's
Lynley
right.
series. That's quite a feat for any author to be able to say that they have written in one universe for so very long and with such great success. I mean, I think that these books, they really find their way into people's hearts because they are wonderful mysteries, but there's something so special about these characters that I
Thank you.
know people that I know have read them, they just stick with you. And I wonder if you could start by talking a little bit about the setup for this book, but I know we can't talk too much about spoilers or too much about those things,
Right.
but
Yeah,
a little bit of the setup of this book and where we find our characters now.
sure. Well, the first thing is that the book takes place in Cornwall, and this is my third visit to Cornwall for a crime novel. It involves the death of a man who is something called a tin streamer, which is the way tin has been mined in Cornwall for hundreds of years. Because tin does not exist naturally, you don't go into a mine and start pounding tin out of the wall of the mine, out of the stones. It exists inside of a stone called cassiterite, and cassiterite has to be broken, and the tin has to be brought out of the cassiterite through a process that's known as tin streaming. I won't go into that any further, other than to say that this man is sitting on a piece of property that an ecological mining company wants, and that is at the crux of the novel. The characters become involved for several reasons. Lynley's ancestral home is in Cornwall, and in the words of the British aristocracy, this is called the family pile. And this particular family pile is a huge structure that is also called a grade 2 listed building, which means that any change in the building has to be made in accordance with the period of time from which the building came. The exterior. If it's a grade 2 listed building, you can do what you want to the interior, but the exterior has to be kept in its original form. And that means that if something happens to the building, you have to find the building materials that come from that period. Okay, so always when I'm doing one of these novels, part of the challenge is to get my characters in the location where the crime occurs, because I don't want all of my crimes to occur in London, which is where Lynley and Havers, my two characters, work. I want them also to be able to go out to other locations as well. So in this particular novel, what occurs is that Lynley's ancestral home, called Hohenstow, has had a serious leak in its roof, and that leak has gone unnoticed because of where it is. It's in the gallery, and these great homes often have really long picture galleries that were used for exercise, actually, during the rainy season, and they would just walk up and down the gallery. So his home has a particularly long gallery, and this is where the damage has been done and has to be taken care of. So Lynley has to go to Cornwall for that reason. He takes Barbara Havers with him because Barbara Havers has once again gotten into trouble, as she usually does. But in this case, it's because because Lynley has done something that just outrages her, and she storms into his office. They have a very loud argument. I mean, loud on Barbara Havers' part, but not on Lynley's part, and that causes them to be dragged into their superior's office. So that is sort of like the setup that gets them down to Cornwall in the first place.
That sounds like my kind of exercise, just walking up and down a gallery
Really.
room. I really appreciate the care that you always take to get the setup just right in that. As I started this book, I'm going through, I always try to, of course, like any mystery reader, I'm trying to guess and make sure I can, see if I can figure out what's going to happen before it happens. And sometimes I get close, but sometimes I am just so wrong. But I'm trying to set up, okay, how are they going to get here? How are all of these threads going to come together, and how are all the voices going to work? I
Mm,
really appreciate in your writing the way that you work from so many different perspectives. Especially in this book, we have a lot of voices that we are sort of watching and weaving together,
right.
and they all sound and feel so distinct, which I really appreciate in a multi POV novel when
Well, thank you.
each voice feels unique. Each voice is giving us something a little bit different.
Mhm.
Can you talk for us a little bit about how those voices come to you and how you decide which perspectives the story is going to come from?
Well, that's a great question. When I'm doing, I always create the characters in advance of beginning to write the novel. So I have a pretty good idea of who these people are. Once I've got the characters created, decide who are going to be my point of view characters. I try to have the point of view characters sort of fit seamlessly into the action of the novel. And I also try, I mean, frequently what they are supposed to be doing is they are supposed to be cohesive with the theme of the book. So I'm seeking a point of view character that does both of those things. That is cohesive, has a subplot that has a strong subplot that also deals with, in some respect, deals with the theme of the book. And then once I have those point of view characters, then the development of the voice of that character comes from the character's analysis. Who is this person? What are his or her likes, dislikes? What's the person's pathological maneuver? What are their core needs? And those are the things that influence basically what they sound like. So a good example would be the character of Gloriana Lobb, who's one of the point of view characters, and she has a particular struggle and a particular set of beliefs, and these dominate not only her action in the book but also the way she talks in her point of view. Because what I'm trying to do is to see the action through the point of view of a particular character. And the way that character relates to what's going on and relates to the reader, what's going on, is different from another character. And often that is depicted in the language that reflects their point of view. So, for example, Lynley's point of view is not going to have the same kind of edge to it as Barbara's point of view does, because Barbara's really, she's an edgy character. She's got a chip on her shoulder, and Lynley is a character who moves through life with a particular amount of grace that Barbara Havers doesn't have. And so, my choice of vocabulary has to be very specific to those characters. So there's certain ways that Lynley would see a case, and through his point of view, we see the case that would not use the same kind of language. So that has a lot to do with then what their point of view sounds like on the page.
I really appreciate getting that insight because I think so often when we read a mystery novel, a procedural, that there is a lot of focus on plot. And, I think that for a lot of readers, that's the first thing that comes to mind. But when you
Mhm.
have these series that go on, for many books, there's so many in the mystery space where we're living in these universes for a long time. And I think that they don't quite work if you aren't fully invested in the characters that you're inhabiting.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's not just necessarily, even in this case, Lynley and Havers or some of the longtime characters, but even the characters who may only show up for one book or show up for one book and then show up 9 books later another time. You really have to become invested in those people for it all to work.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. And especially, I think, as you pointed out, if you're going to do a series, It's really important that the writer be invested in the characters so that the reader can be invested in the characters. Agatha Christie once said that she was so sorry that she had created Hercule Poirot the way she created him, because then she was stuck with this character who was a retired Belgian detective who had an egg-shaped head, wore patent leather shoes, and liked to drink little cups of hot chocolate. And so that's, pretty one-dimensional as a character, and his function, of course, is just to solve the mystery for the reader. And the type of book that Agatha Christie wrote was sort of a challenge, where she was sort of saying, okay, see if you can figure out who did it before Hercule Poirot tells you who did it. Um, and that was not interesting to me as a writer to do that, because I think it's pretty tough to come up with a character whose only function is to solve the crime. Well, what I mean by that is it's tough to make that character interesting if that character only exists to solve the crime. And so I wanted characters that the reader would be invested in, not only the one-time character, that are only going to be in that book, but also the long-time characters too. I believe that's really a critical part of crime writing.
I agree. I think that there are so many moments, there are so many books where I've enjoyed reading them. You are having a good time while you're going through, but as soon as the pieces come together, as soon as you've solved the thing, as soon as you know who did it, you're like, okay, I can put that down and I've
Right,
moved
right,
on. But with
exactly. Yeah.
series like this, every time you finish, you know you want to come back to see those characters again. You want to make sure they're okay. You want to see what they're getting up to next. And especially a character, I mean, I think personally, Barbara Havers is one of my favorite crime fighting characters of all time, just because there's so much there. And I think that she's so relatable for readers
Mhm.
and also infuriating for readers that it's a great balance. And to go and watch these characters who you care about and have really great plot that goes along, it's that balance that I think is really important.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. That's you have to have both, I think, especially if you're going to go at this for a long time and you're hoping that readers will stay with you as you go at it for a long time. I always wanted to write books where at the end of the book, the reader felt something, or throughout the book, the reader felt something. Because to me, it would be a failure if at the end of the novel, the reader just kind of tossed it over his or her shoulder and then went to the refrigerator and made a bologna sandwich. So that to me would be not particularly successful. And that was the kind of book I didn't want to write. I wanted to write books that would stay with the reader, and in some cases, really make the reader very angry with me as the writer, and that's happened as well, and make people want to know why. Why did I, the writer, make the choices that I made in this particular book? Why did I have certain things happen that were unexpected? And to me, that's what a successful novel does.
Yes, I can think of some of those things in your
Yeah.
work where I had to close the book and take a pause before I returned. But
Yes.
even in this novel, there are characters who, you go back and forth between understanding them, and then they say something and you're like, "Oh, I actually don't know where you're coming from, or I no longer agree with what you're saying." And I think that makes the story move. It really helps you go through because, of course, just like anything in real life, you don't always agree with everything a person may do, or you may have a
Sure.
victim of a crime who you realize is a person that maybe you wouldn't always agree with everything. And, it just goes through, and you have these moments where you're like, oh, I am so caught up in these people. I forgot that I'm trying to solve a crime. And I like that as a reader.
Well, yeah, because nobody is perfect. Nobody does not have moments where they do something or say something that they regret. That's just what life is like, and I want the books to reflect that. So there are characters, especially I think the point of view character Gloriana Lobb is a particularly interesting character in that she is, you know she really has a big conflict about in her life and in her heart and soul because of what has happened within her family. And so what we're seeing is that how the adult is acting out the grief of the child, and that to me was, it makes her an interesting character.
I had a moment or two with her. I was like, oh no, what are you doing? That's okay. I've had those about myself. So we all come together. And I think too, your writing, I mean, this is a hefty, you write some hefty books. You give us a lot to work with. And I really like that in a mystery space because it gives us a lot of opportunity to go deep. And there are a lot of twists and turns in here that I was enjoying along with the ride. Do you always know how it's going to end when you start?
Well, I always know who the killer is.
Okay.
What I don't know, then there's one book that was an exception to that I thought I knew who the killer was, and it turned out to be somebody else. And that was a real surprise to me. But it made sense ultimately when I did when I looked at the book itself as a whole piece. Anyway, so I know who the killer is. I know the killer will be brought to justice in some form, whether it is real justice, poetic justice, physical justice. I mean, something is going to happen to the person who committed the crime, but I don't know how I am going to get there. And so sometimes what happens is that the moment arises where I go, oh my God, as I'm working on the book, it comes to me. That's how they're going to figure out who the killer is. This is the detail that I didn't know earlier about the situation or about the character. And so that's part of the fun of doing the books. It's, as I say, I know who the person is, but I don't stress about how they're going to find out who the character is. I know what the clues are, usually. But once again, I don't know exactly what the detectives are going to make of the different clues that they come across.
I really feel like writing a mystery novel, I mean, even though there are a lot of heavy themes in a lot of your work, it also seems like you have a lot of fun while you write. Like there's a lot of the pace of the book, the propulsiveness of everything. It feels like you're having a good time while you write. And I think that translates as a reader when you can feel that the author is really enjoying putting all the pieces together. It's really enjoyable for the reader to do so as well. And I think that must be such a great thing after being able to come back book after book and have that experience of putting all that together. I'm sure it's infuriating sometimes, but it also seems like it's a lot of fun.
Well, some of it is fun. Some of it is
You're
some
like,
of it
well,
is
Jenna.
some of it is incredibly difficult.
Of course.
And this particular book, I ended up doing 5 drafts until I liked it, because it was such a complicated story as far as putting it together, because there are there are basically 2 sets of detectives.
Mhm.
There's Beatrice Hannaford, who starts out with the case because she is the detective in Cornwall. And then there is the situation with, okay, well, if she starts out with the case and ultimately Lynley becomes involved, what can Beatrice Hannaford find out? And what can Lynley then add to that without finding out the same stuff? So that was a very tricky dance. And what happened is that I would get to a certain part in the book, and I would realize the story had stalled out. A long time ago, my fellow writer Jeff Parker said something that I've always thought was a really great piece of advice. And he said, when the story stalls out for you, you've played your hand too soon. And that was great. That was what a piece of advice, because that allowed me to realize, oh, okay, wait a minute. If it's becoming a slog, then the reason it's becoming a slog exists in the earlier part of the book. And so what have I done to make this now a slog? So what happened is that there were, just 4 different times in the process where it became a slog and I had to start all over again. I wasn't always the same place. Usually I would get a little bit farther along and all of a sudden, oh my God, I've done something wrong, and then I would have to start all over again. But by the time I get the fifth time through, it was I felt that I was probably doing it correctly at that point, and so parts of it are fun. Parts of it are really enjoyable, and that part that I really enjoy is when I get to the rough draft. The earlier parts, which are the step outline and the running plot outline, of those two, the step outline is the most difficult part, and and the step outline is that decision I make of the order in which the scenes are going to occur, and that's crucial to get them in. It's crucial to get them in the right order. It's also crucial that each scene be causally related to some scene down the line, and that is I just hate that part of the process. It's so difficult. And then then I put those scenes together in the kind of the right order, and then I can turn to the running plot outline, which is the part where the process becomes more enjoyable for me. And then from that into the rough draft. And then when I'm doing the rough draft, that's when I can, I can play with language. I can delve into the setting. I can bring in important details and everything that goes into giving the reader a really rich experience. That's when I can do that stuff, which I really, really enjoy.
There are so many steps to this. It's like it feels almost the way you described that, like its own mystery novel, writing the mystery novel, just to try to get all the the
Yeah,
clues
because
uncovered for yourself.
there's so many moving parts,
Mhm.
and especially writing this kind of a novel. If it was sort of a lighthearted romp through murder, which is what cozies are, it might be easier. One of the things about Agatha Christie's novels that are so interesting and make her such a fine writer is that she knew how to place a clue in a scene, for example, and then pivot to a different direction, so the reader does not see the clue, and that requires a certain amount of finesse, because if the clue is there, then there has to be a reason why the scene is there also, and the scene doesn't just exist because of the clue. The scene is part of the subplot of the ongoing story of the novel. So super super tricky.
Well, if for us as readers, it feels seamless, and so I think that that means things are that you found that sweet spot on the fifth draft to go through
Yeah,
because
I was satisfied with the fifth draft.
yes, I think that'll reassure a lot of our listeners who are writers as well, that even at this, even a story that you feel confident about and you feel like the ending can take a few drafts to get there. I think that that is,
Oh yeah, yeah.
a reality of being a writer, and, to go through those things and say, oh, yeah, it's not always just going to be, so I sit down and I wrote this 700-page novel in one sitting and here it is.
Right,
There's a
right.
lot that goes. I I do like thinking about the way that you get to play with language when you get there, because something I've always really appreciated about your work is that is it feels like a great deal of research done to sort of give us these niche worlds, whether it's like tin streaming or cricket, or
Mhm. Mhm.
there is something that is really that we're able to delve into. And for me in this book, the thing that I was the most like that I let myself sink into was Cornwall itself, because it's
Mhm.
not somewhere I'm super familiar with. I've never been. I found myself Googling pictures. I was like trying to get a sense for everything, because I call myself a rabbit hole reader. And once I get started, I'm like, well, I have to know what that is, and I have to know what that machine looks like. And I went on a whole journey.
That's
And
interesting. That's great.
so I was hoping you could talk a little bit about your research process and how it feels to sort of get all of this information together to tell the story.
That's part of the fun, is being able to do this. Um, I generally, in the past, I have done a lot of in situ interviews. So I have interviewed any number of policemen and policewomen, detectives mostly, but I've also worked through the press office in a number of different police precincts as well. Well, they don't call it precinct, but constabularies as well. Um, So that is really on the ground research. But I also uh, have interviewed people, via Zoom, and I have also been able to find a lot of information in books and online and through YouTube, and just all kinds. There are all kinds of ways to get information these days that did not exist when I first started writing these books. So. Going to the location, one of the things I'm doing is I'm looking for places that suggest story to me. I've read about the place in advance. I have I have determined with my on my atlas which areas that what I'm going to go look at. So an example would be Blue Hills tin streaming, which is one of the places that I went to see. So I knew it was there. I didn't know if I was going to use it or not, but I went to the location. I saw exactly how tin streaming was done. It was really he has a wonderful setup where he has made he's made the location a place where you can learn about tin streaming at the same time as you can actually watch it in process. And so that was really fascinating to learn how that was done. Then I'm also going to locations without knowing if I'm going to use them in the book. For example, I knew that there was this Bronze Age village that was out in the middle of Cornwall, and out in the countryside somewhere. And so I went to the Bronze Age village. I was able to find it, and I was able to see there in the Bronze Age village something that I knew that I could use. Again, I wasn't sure if I would be how I would use it, but I knew I could use it if I wanted to. And then that was this particular underground tunnel that the Bronze Age people had built that was all stone on the bottom wall, ceiling, and they don't know exactly what it was for. And it also within it contained an additional room, a circular room that had a hole in the ceiling that looked like perhaps that was for smoke to go out of. But again, they didn't really know. So it's the same thing. Like when I was there, I thought, well, maybe I can use this. I think I can. And I always take lots of photographs, and then I always speak into my handheld tape recorder. I always then transcribe the notes when I get back to my hotel, and then all of these things together, the photographs, the notes, my impressions, all of that stuff, then it becomes material that I can use if I want to. So it's really this process of exploration on the ground in any location that I'm using. And I don't know when I'm there if for sure that I will use something, but there are certain things that beg to be used because they're so interesting.
And that really just adds so much to the reading experience. I think, like I said, the setting of this is so interesting, and I did have to look up how to pronounce some things. I was like listening to the audiobook at the same time because I would not have known how to pronounce Mousel.
Oh,
Um,
Mousel, yeah, looks like a skull. Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
but I appreciated getting all of that together, and like I said, it just really comes together because in a mystery, I mean, and especially in your work, there are so many great moments through the series where I like learn things. I still think about Payment in Blood all the time. Like that's probably my hands down favorite Lynley.
Really? Okay.
Uh-huh. And the theater there, and like I said, the cricket and playing for the Ashes, like, there's so many of those moments where I'm like, I still like will remember a fact just from there. And I
Mhm.
appreciate that in writing where I get to have those little things that stick with you, and even in a something like a procedural that you get to put in a little bit and get a lot back out.
Mhm. Yeah, and in doing the research, there are fascinating things that I discover. For example, how easy it is now for the British police to take someone's cell phone and just download everything in a matter of in a matter of minutes once they have the phone. And it was so funny because when I was actually talking to one of the senior investigating officers, and I was talking to her about this particular item that they use, it's called kiosk, and she was really surprised I knew about it because it at the time was part of the Official Secrets Act. And she said, well, how did you find out about this? And I said, well, it's I found out that it was used in Scotland, and there story about it. And then I looked it up and then got all the information from there. But most people didn't know that that this particular thing existed. So that's kind of the fun part of it, to recognize the advances in police work and all of this stuff that's out there ready to be used by investigators. So I really love finding out that stuff.
And it just makes it so much more easy to connect to the story. And I think especially when you have work, I mean, your work has been adapted. There are now two Lynley series. Um, and there to have that piece there where you really are able to put faces and people with the stories. I
Mm.
think it just makes it, I mean, I again have seen the older series. I watched all of as it aired, and I think I still sometimes picture those actors as the characters.
Sure, sure.
And now there's a new series that has just started, and I think it really, I'm so excited for a whole new like group of people to find these
Mm.
characters and to find this work. How does it feel to have that piece of a career as an author, to have your work adapted? Because it's not something that everyone gets to experience.
It's really it's a combination of maddening and thrilling. I think that the one thing I did know going into it about the books being made into films for television is that you really do have to be willing to kiss it goodbye as a
Mhm.
writer, because the filmmakers, the screenwriters, they're all going to have their vision of the books, and they have to be able to feel free to adapt the books the way they see them and the way they think that the books will work for television. What I loved about the first series was Sharon Small's performance as Barbara Havers, which was just right on the money. And I loved the fact that they actually, and this was a long time ago, so it was probably a lot easier then. They actually went to the locations where things happened in the book. And so, I mean, I was just astonished when I saw, for example, in Cambridge, in the book For the Sake of Elena, they actually went. Not only did they go to Cambridge to film, but they went and they were able to film in the exact spot where Elena is murdered, which is pretty
That's wild.
amazing. Yeah, it
Yeah.
was absolutely amazing, and they consistently did that throughout. They would go to most, with the exception of Payment in Blood, where they didn't go to Scotland to film that. They stayed in England to film it. But in all the rest, they went actually to the exact locations, it was super gratifying. And although the stories themselves were reduced to just the crime and its solution rather than the larger experience that the reader has in the books, they still managed to capture the flavor of the books and the personalities of the characters involved. And I really, really appreciated that. Plus, it was amazing because my husband and I have started rewatching them, and it was totally astonishing to see, because it's been years since we've seen them. And here in Payment and Blood is Idris Elba. It's like my passion, Idris Elba. And we're watching. I'm going, oh my God, that's Idris Elba. Bill Nye is in it. I mean, there's just a score of all of these people who are now, sort of major names, and they were sort of cutting their teeth in my books in these television series. So that was great fun.
And I think it really is a highlight. It highlights why we love mysteries and why we love like a whodunit story so much. I think
Mhm.
it's just human nature to really become so quickly invested in a great mystery. And I love being able to just like sink into a story and be like,
Mhm.
well, I got to find out now. There's no way I can leave this story unturned, so I have to go through. And it's just such a gratifying experience as readers that we get to have those like contained mystery stories.
Yeah, that's what I love about reading series, is being able to see a forward movement of the story, and also being able to see a particular location and how that location influences what goes on in the story too.
And now I know you've written for obviously this series, and you've also written for young people. You've written like a young reader series as well. How does it feel does it feel different to write for the different audiences? Do you bring the same tactics, the same approach, or is it wildly different to go through?
Well, it's different in that the when doing a young adult series, the young adults in the series are who fuels the story. They determine the forward movement of the story, and although there are adults within that world of the young adults, they are not propelling the story forward. And that was something that I had to get used to, is how are the young adults going to move this forward. I so that is a 5-book series that I did, and they take place on Whidbey Island in the state of Washington, which is where I used to live on Whidbey. Now I live in Seattle, and so the challenge there, of course, was once again to make the setting as real as possible for the reader, and that is, that's always the big challenge I face, is how much detail will allow the reader to see exactly where we are, and that will bring this area to life for the reader. And that is similar no matter what. But the plotting of the novel then is different because as I said, it's the young adults, and we're looking at their experiences, not so much the adult experience, although the adult experience touches frequently on the young person's experience. And the young people don't exist in a world without adults. So we do see their families, and how they the conflicts within their families, and how that determines how the young adults behave, as well as the situation they find themselves in.
I I would be remiss if we didn't, as booksellers, talk a little bit about some of your literary influences and some books that you love and some authors you love. So if you would be able to just talk with us a little bit about, yeah, some of your influences.
There was a novel that really influenced the way I created my detectives, and that was a novel called Traitor's Purse by Margery Allingham. I think it's Margery Allingham.
I think that's right.
Albert Campion is the sleuth, and in that book, um, Albert Campion is wakes up with amnesia. And I read it a long time ago. I cannot remember exactly the ins and outs of the story, but he is totally dependent upon his sidekick, and this woman that he has known for many years. And during the course, actually, when he finally comes to, even though he has amnesia, he can't remember who this woman is, but he knows he loves her, and he's never ever told her that he loves her, because he's never recognized he loves her, and he's in a very, very vulnerable position as a result of that. He has to depend on these two people to help him. And so that really humanized Albert Campion. And I learned from that book that the importance of making your detective not only a human being, but a human being with connections. So that had a tremendous influence on me. And I would say that of all the books that I've read that were crime books, that would probably be the number one. There are other people that have influenced me based on the way they handle setting, or the way they have a dual point of view, or something like that. The person who does setting right now, I thought, during her lifetime, PD James was really wonderful doing setting, and I really appreciated the way she did that. Right now, I think the person who is handling setting amazingly is Tana French, the Irish crime writer. And her settings are just breathtaking, the way she's able to really create a place that you feel like you are in. That's what I always aim for, is to do that kind of thing. Beyond that, I don't do a lot of reading in crime. I do a lot of reading of just sort of across the board. And once again, it's that. But I do think the thing that influences me the most is that idea of how a writer is able to bring to life not only characters but setting as well, and having the characters interact with each other within that setting. I think is just really wonderful.
I agree. I thought a lot about Tana French while I was reading this book, and the way that I could feel Cornwall like I can often feel Ireland in her books.
Yes, yeah, and especially I think her latest book was amazing with setting.
Mm-hmm.
She really is, and she's just astonishing in her ability to really make a place super real for the reader. She always does that.
Absolutely. So, my last question is something I wonder when I read series where, the characters are so fleshed out. They've been, they've lived entire lives. Do they ever still surprise you as you write?
Well, yes, in that I would say that Lynley doesn't surprise me because Lynley is um, so much of he is so true to himself at all times. And
Right.
so he doesn't surprise me. He may do something that I didn't expect him to do, but it is always within his character to do that. For example, at the end of Playing for the Ashes, when he says to Helen, this is, because for people who haven't read it, wouldn't make any sense, but she has asked him something very specific about one of the characters in the book, and what's going to happen to that character. And he says to her, this is a murder investigation. That's where it begins. That's where it ends. And that tells the reader, what he is and isn't going to do. And so he's a person of tremendous compassion, which is what Weberly in the very first book wants Havers to learn from working with Lynley. So it's always within his character to do what he does. With Barbara Havers, it's the same thing, that they're within character, but I don't plan their responses and their activities in advance. I don't plan that. I let them react within character to the situation that they're in, which sounds sort of weird because it's like that's all coming from my brain, but they are very much living people, and so whereas Lynley is not the kind of person who's going to be married to one person and have an affair with another person. I mean, that's just not who he is. He wouldn't do that. That's not the character. He might do something that I didn't plan on him doing, but when I look at it, I realize, okay, yeah, that does make sense.
I love that. I can't wait to see what they do next. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me today. I am so excited for people to get their hands on A Slowly Dying Cause and to find out what our characters have been up to. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.